Hello everyone, good evening. I'm sharing my screen. Just give me one moment, guys. Yeah, we are supposed to start off with end-to-end solution in today's session. So we already created a couple of Vbcs applications in the past, but at this point, some of you, not some of you, most of you might be still struggling to understand why exactly our clients use VBCs, or in fact, how are clients leveraging three cloud services that we have in OIC to build the custom end-to-end solutions. So we'll set the context for that end-to-end solution today. So this is actual requirement that I've built and delivered for one of the public council in UK. So wherein client had a requirement, and yes, they have around 2,500 to 3,000 users, and all these users have to do is they need an application where they can log in and submit AR invoice requests. Okay, so client has around 3,000 users. So they need an application into which they can log in and submit AR invoice requests. So what is one straightforward way to handle this requirement, guys? One straightforward way to handle this requirement is, so yes, a client has 3,000 users. They need an application to log in and submit AR invoice requests. So I can create all these users as users in ERP Cloud, and I can assign them AR related roles, assign them accounts receivable related roles, so that those users, when they log into cloud, they would be able to access AR screen. Okay, what is one straightforward way to handle this requirement? One straightforward way to handle this requirement is you can go into Fusion Cloud application. EUDU, we're seeing a lot of performance issues in this instance, guys, since morning, and I'm working with a vendor to see if there is any other alternate instance available.
Not since morning, Prasad. It's been like 3-4 days.
No. Yesterday and today, not today. Yesterday and day before, it was pretty fine. Monday and Tuesday, it was worse. Wednesday and Thursday, it was completely fine. Yeah, we also had to cancel few training sessions as well because of this. Okay. That's okay. Why? I'll show you that security console screen. So one obvious way to handle this requirement is we can create these users as users in ERP Cloud. So you can go to Tool Security Console. I can define these users in Cloud, and I can give them AR related roles like accounts receivable manager and accounts receivable specialist, so that when those users log into Fusion Cloud, they would be able to see the standard AR invoice screen. But what are the problems with this approach, guys? The problems with this approach is, well, it's not opening it all up. So the problems with this approach is, first of all, since we are giving these users access to the standard AR invoice screen, any custom functionality is not possible. Okay, so yes, since we are using a standard AR invoice screen, we can probably make use of some what do you call? You can probably enable DFFs or use DFFs to enable few additional attributes on the screen. But apart from that, we cannot make any major changes in terms of custom functionality. And the major problem that with this approach is, so for using this Fusion Cloud application, a client is going to get a bill from Oracle. Remember, this is a software as a service product of Fusion Cloud application. And for using this product, client would get a bill from Oracle, and that bill would be dependent on the number of users configured in the application. It would be dependent on the number of users configured in the application. So just for the sake of the solution, if you define 3,000 additional users and assume that Oracle charges $10 per user, assume that Oracle charges $10 per user. So what's the amount that the client has to pay to Oracle? It would be 3,000 into $10 per user every single month. And what if client uses the solution for 10 years, the Fusion Cloud application? It would be into 120. So just because these users need to access one single screen in Fusion Cloud application, just because these users need to access one single screen or a couple of screens in Fusion Cloud application, it doesn't really make sense for client to pay this much amount to Oracle. So when I got this requirement, I asked the client, are these users, do these users have to do anything else in ERP Cloud apart from just accessing AR invoice screen and submitting a request? Well, the answer that we've got is yes, there is no, these users, they don't do any other thing, they don't perform any other action in Fusion Cloud. They don't perform any other action in Fusion Cloud. Okay, so in such case, does it really make sense for client to spend this much amount just because users need to log into AR invoice screen and submit request phase? Not really. And another major problem is, yes, if these users raise 10 requests, out of those 10, 3 requests would have errors. Okay, so since we are giving users access to standard AR invoice screen, out of 10 requests, all 10 would be created in ERP Cloud in the AR invoice screen. So whatever are those 3 requests which are rejected, they would be showing up as junk data. They would be showing up as junk data in Fusion Cloud. Okay, and approval process is also not available. So in this case, no approval process is available for AR invoice case, and it is available for most of the business objects, transaction-related business objects in Fusion Cloud. But if a business object does not have approval process, then the approach one might not be possible because Oracle has not given approval process for a specific business object. But this won't be the case. Oracle has already given approval process for most of the business objects, especially the transaction-related one. So what we proposed is for this particular solution. Yes, we have asked, we have told client that we will be building an application in Vbcs, a complex web app in Vbcs, and this particular Vbcs application, so the screens that we built here would be similar to the ones that you see in ERP Cloud. Would be similar to the ones that you see in ERP Cloud. Okay, so if you go into Fusion Cloud application here, let me go into receivables, create transaction. Yeah, it's taking a long time. So we will be building an application in Vbcs, which is going to look something similar to this. Yeah, we're going to create we would create a screens which replicate the AR invoice screens that we see here in Fusion Cloud. We cannot replicate this as is in Vbcs because Oracle itself would have taken a couple of years to build this particular screen. Okay, so we would try to resemble or replicate these pages in Fusion Cloud, in Vbcs application to the extent possible. And how is it going to look like? It's going to look something like this. It's going to look something like this. So we're going to build this complex web app in Vbcs, wherein on the landing page, we show the list of invoice requests that this particular user has submitted. We show the invoice requests that this particular user has submitted. And we also give user an option to create, edit, or delete an invoice. And we also give user an option to search for the invoice request here. Okay, by typing in either the invoice reference or a status. And yes, what user is going to do, they're going to create an invoice, entering the customer transaction details and so on. And after they create an invoice, they're going to go ahead and edit the invoice. And in the edit invoice page, we would show Let me pick another invoice which has lines. So first of all, client is going to create an invoice, and then he would go ahead and edit the invoice and add lines on top of it. So yes, in the header section, we're going to show the invoice header, invoice details, header details at the top. And in the line section, we display the lines that this invoice has, and we also give user an option to perform CRUD operations here. They should be able to create, update, or delete lines from here. And from the edit invoice screen, we also give them an option to submit an invoice. Now, when they hit the submit button here, what is it that we're going to do, guys? So as soon as they submit the request from Vbcs, we're going to kick off an approval process in PCS. So we'll go to Process Cloud Service. In PCS, we're going to create a multi-layer approval process. Go to PCS. In PCS, we would be building a multi-layer approval process in PCS as per the client requirement. And let me show you how that PCS application is going to look like. I will create this application in PCS. Yeah. So if you look at this, it's a multi-layer approval process that we build in PCS. We're going to build this from scratch. And we will kick off this approval process from Vbcs as and when user submits a request. As and when user submits a request from Vbcs, we will be kicking off this approval process in PCS. Okay. And in this approval process, what exactly are we going to do? We would send the request to manager for approval first. So the manager would do basic rechecks, and he would either approve the request or reject it. If he rejects it, the only thing that we need to do is we need to come back to Vbcs and we have to mark the invoice as rejected. We have to come back to Vbcs and we just have to update the status of the invoice request as rejected. Okay, we don't have to do anything else. So how are we going to update the status of a specific invoice from PCS, guys? Remember, in Vbcs, we're going to create invoice and lines as two different business objects. So we would have invoice created as one business object. You have lines as a separate business object, customer as a third one, and so on. And the moment you create invoice as a business object, there would be 5 CRUD endpoints exposed automatically. So we will be calling update invoice endpoint here. We would be calling update invoice Vbcs REST API and mark the status as rejected. And if the manager approves it, we send it to audit team for approval. And here we check if audit team would verify thoroughly each and every field on the invoice. And if something is wrong, they're going to reject it. And if it is approved, if everything is fine, the invoice would be approved. And we would check if the transaction total is more than 1,000 or not. We would check if the transaction total. So after the audit team or the income systems team thoroughly validates the invoice and approves it, we would check if the transaction total is more than 1,000. If that is the case, we need an additional level of approval, which is that of our finance director. And yes, the same story repeats here. If he has approved it or if he rejects it. So there are 3 approvers, and if any of them rejects it, we just have to do one thing. We need to go back into Vbcs mark it as rejected. And if it is approval branches, yes, we need to mark the invoice as approved. Yes, we will invoke the update invoice REST API and we would mark it as approved. And not just that, we are also going to invoke a REST API. We are also going to call a REST API. So we would build a REST API and integrations track, and we will call that REST API here. How will that REST API going to look like? The AR invoice REST API that we build in integrations is going to look like this. Like it's a REST API which would take an invoice ID as input. Say, for example, if we submit this invoice request for approval, okay, so if this invoice is submitted for approval, it would go to manager first, audit team, and the finance director since amount is more than 1,000. And if all three approvers approved it, we mark it as approved in Vbcs. And this REST API will be called, and this REST API will be called, and to this REST API we will pass in invoice ID as input. We will pass in invoice ID as input here. Now in the REST API, what is it that we're going to do, guys? We would make two REST API calls. We would call get invoice details endpoint to get the invoice details from Vbcs, and we would also get the line details from Vbcs. Based on invoice ID, you get the header and the line details. And I will club the invoice details and the line details, and invoke a create AR invoice API of the REST API. And once the AR invoice creation is successful, we would go ahead and update invoice in Vbcs. If the AR invoice is created successfully, we would come back and update the status as completed. From the approval process, from the approval and the rejection branches, we would mark it as either rejected or approved. And from the integration, we're going to mark the invoices completed, and we would also stamp the transaction number as well. And just for our reference purpose, in the response here, we're going to bring the transaction number. So this way, yes, over the next few days, we're going to build these three services. Okay, we will build this web application first, a Vbcs web app. And as soon as the user submits a request from Vbcs, we would see how to kick off this multi-layer approval process from it. And after approvals are obtained, we would see how to kick off this REST API from the approval flow. And from the REST API, we're going to create AR invoice in ERP. So this is a flow that we're going to build. Vbcs to PCS to ICS or REST API, and then to ERP cloud. Now, if client says approvals are not required, then we can directly send the request from Vbcs to ERP itself. In fact, after we build this Vbcs application, right? After we build this Vbcs application, I'm also going to show you, after we build this Vbcs application, I'm also going to show you how to send the request to ERP directly. So when I build this application, after we are done with the build, when we hit the submit button, I'll first show you how to send this AR invoice to ERP directly if required. And then, but this would not be the case very often, because 99% of the clients would have approvals in place. So we would see how to do this first from Vbcs to ERP, and then we'll change this flow. And instead of sending it to ERP, we're going to call the approval process. Now, how do these problems stand with this flow, guys? First of all, any custom functionality is possible because these are all the custom applications that we have. And the main problem with the first approach is billing, right? So in OIC, billing is going to work on the basis of messages. In OIC, billing is going to work on the basis of messages triggered per hour. Okay, so even though, yes, we're going to give access of this Vbcs application to 3,000 users. So for these 3,000 users to be able to access the Vbcs application, we would have to create these users as users in Identity Domain Cloud Service in OCI. Remember where we create users in, we've seen how to create users in session 5, right? When we have seen how to create OIC instance and so on. So we go to that screen, create users in IDCS in OCI. And after that, we give access of this Vbcs application to these 3,000 users. Since a billing in OIC works on the basis of messages triggered per hour, not on the basis of users defined in IDCS, so the major billing problem is resolved. Okay, and we don't have the problem of time data. we don't have the problem of chunk data because only the approved request will be sent from VCS to REST API. So if there are 3 requests, if 3 requests have errors here, out of 10, we send only those 7 requests to the REST API. We will invoke REST API for only those 7 requests, and only those 7 requests will be sent to ERP cloud. So we don't have the problem of chunk data. We don't have the problem of chunk data, it's resolved. So you have 3 out of 10 requests have errors, and only 7 requests, so 3 requests have errors. If 3 requests have errors, they would be stuck within the PCS itself. They don't even proceed further to integrations. So only the valid data would go to the ERP cloud. So you don't have the problem of chunk data here. And since it is our own approval process that we are building here, and since it is our own custom flow, we don't have to really care whether approval process is given by Oracle or not for invoices here. So for the next few days, we're going to build this end-to-end solution. We're going to build the components one after the other. So we'll start off with a Vbcs application first. And after we build it, we go to PCS. And in PCS, what are we going to do is we're not going to build this complex approval process straight away. Instead, we would create a Travrll approval process in PCS first to understand the basics of PCS. And once we are familiar with the PCS and how it works, we would build this approval process, complex approval process. And once we're done with this one, we go to integrations and create an approval process here. Sorry, we go ahead and create an integration here. Any questions on this flow, guys? Any questions from anyone?
Prashad, Sachin.
Mm-hmm.
In case of creating 2000 to 3000 users, we can, like in OIC, we can create 1 or 10 users, and that same users logins can be used, right, for creation of invoices to the end users we can give.
No, the problem is the users, the approvers for these users change. We cannot have generic users. So you see these 3 approvals here, right? So these 3 approvers here. So when Sachin submits a request, it goes to Abhinav, and after Abhinav approves it, it goes to John, and after John approves it, it goes to Steve. But when Prasad submits a request, it is a different approvers that we have to send it to. Okay, and if we use common users, it's not going to work out. Okay, so the approvers keep changing for these users. Any other questions, guys, from anyone? Okay, now we need to. Yeah, please go on.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, Prasad. It's a kind of a very different requirement. Why? Because AR invoice that many users, is it really comes in the real life?
Yeah, well, this was this was a public council in UK, and all these users had to do is to raise the tax invoices against the customers for the tax that they need to pay on a half yearly or yearly basis. So this was an actual scenario that I've run into.
Okay. Because mostly AP invoice, we thought that this is something which takes AR invoice.
Yeah.
That's why I asked. Please get it.
Yeah. So we need to go ahead and we need to. And to create this VBCS application, first of all, we need to create a required data model, right? So first of all, let me show you what are the business objects that we need for this. To build this AR invoice web app, first of all, to build this application, we need 2 business objects. We need 2 business objects. AR invoice, sorry, for this AR invoice web app, we need, if you look at the data model that we need 2 business objects. First of all, we need invoice business object. And in the invoice business object, we need to have these fields. In the invoice business object, we need to have these invoice header fields. Okay, so we need to have customer details, currency code, transaction details, and we also need to have the amount columns as well. We also need to have the amount columns as well. Okay. And apart from these two fields, apart from the customer and the transaction details, we also need the amount fields as well. And we just give me one moment, guys. So for this VBCS web app, we need to have invoice business object first. And in the invoice business object, we want to store these invoice details like the customer details, transaction details, and the amount details. And we also need a lines business object, invoice lines business object, wherein we are going to store the description, quantity, USP, and line total. And to create an invoice, we need a customer, right? Even on the edit invoice screen, we give user an option to edit the invoice as well. So we need to have a separate business object for customer. And also when a user creates a line, we give them an option to create a product as well. We give them an option to pick a product as well. Okay, so we're going to create product as a separate business object. Okay, so what's the data model that we need? We need a data model which is made up of at least 4 business objects, invoice and lines. And to create an invoice, we need customer, and on a line, we pick up a product. And in these business objects, we need to have these fields with these data types, So on an invoice, first of all, in every business object, we need to have ID column, which acts like a primary key. And on the invoice business object, you have the customer details like number, business unit, currency code, transaction details, and the amounts. On the customer business object, you have the customer details. On the customer business object, you have the customer details. And you have lines business object here, where you have the description, quantity, USP, and so on. And every line belongs to an invoice. So we're going to store invoice as a reference field in the lines business object. We would store invoice as a reference field in the lines business object. And on a line, we would be picking up a product, right? So the product would also be stored as a reference field. So these are the four business objects that we need. And these are the columns that we need within them. Okay. So we need 4 business objects, and these are the columns that we need within them. And yes, one customer could have multiple invoices, and one invoice could have multiple lines, and multiple lines could have a same product. So that's why you see many-to-one relationship there. And we've already seen 2 different ways to create business objects and the columns within them, right? So in the HR web app itself, we have seen how to create a business object manually. And we've also seen how to import a business objects with the help of an Excel sheet. Okay, we've also seen how to import a business object with an Excel sheet. So how are we going to create this data model? So we're not going to create it from scratch again. So what I did is I've created a new application in Vbcs. What I did is I created a new application in Vbcs. And in that new application, I have only created this data model. I've only created these 4 business objects with these columns within them and these data types. And what I did is after I created that application with a data model in it, what I did is I've exported that application. Okay, so I created a VBCS app with this data model in another OIC instance, and I've exported that as a data model. And I've shared it in this material folder. So if you go into OIC material folder, VBCS, AR invoice web app, you would be able to see this particular zip file. ERP AR invoice VBCS application data model zip file. Okay, so this is nothing but a VBCS application that I created in another instance, wherein I only have created a data model in it, the business objects and the columns. So we'll be using this as a starting model to build this application, to build the VBCS app. Because if you have to create this data model again, we're going to spend, we would need to spend at least 1 hour. Since we've already seen how to do it in 2 different ways earlier, I'm not going to do it again from scratch. Instead, we would import that data model. We would import that VBCS data model or VBCS app. I'm going to update this to our latest version. I'm going to delete this application. We don't need it. We're going to create it from scratch. And if you go into business objects, you're able to see 4 business objects in here. You see customer, product, invoice, and lines. Okay, so you see customer. And in the customer business object, you have customer related fields like customer business unit, customer name, number, currency code. And we have product business object, and in product, we have description, unit selling price. Right, so we have a description and unit selling price on the product. And on the invoice business object, you have invoice related fields, invoice header related fields like customer, business unit, currency code, payment terms, and so on. And we also have lines business object imported. And in the lines business object, you have invoice and product as a reference fields. Invoice and product are the reference fields in the lines business object. And we have line related fields like a description, quantity, USP, and the line total. Okay. And for these business objects, right, you also do this in real time. Guys, after you set up a required data model, you need to go ahead and add at least a couple of data rows here. You need to go ahead and add at least a couple of data rows here. Okay. So what I did here is, how did I pick up the customers here? So I went into create AR invoice screen, and I tried to pick up a couple of customers from here. Okay. So I went to AR invoice screen, and I searched for a couple of customers from this AR invoice screen, and I've added them in here. So we've got Easy Solutions, customer, and McNally products, and I've picked up the customer number and the currency code. And I also added, I created a product business object as well. And I also inserted 2 or 3 products in here. Okay, so after we create the required business object, you also insert some sample data rows as well into it. And we also have created, I've created a couple of invoices here. Again, from the backend, how did I do it? How do you add a customer? So I went ahead and I clicked on a plus icon here, and I added a new customer manually from here. So after I create the business objects, I went into each one of them and I added a data rows explicitly. I added the data rows explicitly. Okay, so I've added two customers explicitly here, and I also added two invoices here, invoice 23 and 25. And on these two invoices, I created two lines, one line on each invoice, one line on each invoice. The first line belongs to 23, second line belongs to 25. And on the lines, we also select a product as well. On the lines, we select a product as well. Okay, so I have this required data model created wherein we have 4 business objects, and in each business object, we have the required fields. And we also have a couple of data rows as well inserted. Now, why do I have to add the data rows manually from here, guys? The reason why we have to, why I included a couple of data rows here is, if you have some sample data in the business objects, when you start doing the user interface build, it would help you quite a bit. It would help you quite a bit. Okay. Now, if I go into into web app here, I'm going to create a new one. I would say AR invoice web app, and I don't need any navigation items. And I'll fine tune the header and footer flag. I'm going to fine tune the footer as well. I'm going to close all of the tabs. Let me open the application I created for a previous batch here, so that I can show you what we're going to build or how the landing page is going to look like. So on the landing page, we want to display the heading as invoice request summary. And we want to have a table here. And within the table, we want to display the list of invoice requests. We want to display the list of invoice requests in a table here. So we go ahead and add data to it. So you select invoices, and I want to display invoices in there. And what fields on the invoice we want to display, guys? I want to display invoice ID, bill to customer number, business unit, status, transaction number, total amount, discount, and the discounted amount. So for the amount columns, I don't want to display it as a text column. Instead, I want to display it as a currency field. So the amounts, I want to display it as a currency field. And the discount field, I want to display it as a percentage field here. Okay, so let me explain how these, let me explain the total amount, discount percentage, and discounted amount first. So if you pick up an invoice, I remember an invoice would have lines, right? And on every line, you have quantity and USP. On every line, you have quantity and USP. So yes, for every line, so the product of quantity and USP is displayed as a line total. The product of quantity and unit selling price 2 into 2000 is displayed as a line total. Okay, so this invoice has 2 lines. And yes, on a line, you have quantity and USP. So we will display the line total as 4,000. It's quantity into USP. And we've got two lines here. So the invoice total would be the sum of line totals. So it's 4,000 for plus 1,000, 5,000 would be displayed as a total amount here. So the total amount is nothing but the sum of line totals. And on an invoice, we might give some discount percentage. So whatever discount that we give here, so if you give 20% discount on 5,000, it would be 4,000, right? And if we give 10% discount, it is 4,500 that we have. So so these three fields we want to display there. We want to display the total amount, sum of all the line totals, discount percentage. Remember, the discount is a percentage field in the background, meaning it would be stored as 0.1 or 0.2 in the backend. It would be stored as 0.1 or 0.2 in the backend. But in the front end, you would see it as 10%. And you see the discount percentage here. Discount, we're going to show it as, we're going to display it as a percent here. And the total, the discounted amount as well. So these are the 7 fields that I want to display. And when we go to next screen, what would happen, guys? Get all invoices endpoint will be called, and this endpoint is going to fetch all the invoices and display it in the table. So tell me one thing, guys. When a user logs in, we should not ideally display all the invoice requests submitted by other users as well here. Instead, we should display only the invoice request that this particular user has submitted. So that would be the case in timesheets and expense reports as well, right? Normally, when you go to your company expense report app, what would you see there, guys? Would you see only the expense reports that you submitted, or your friends as well there? Only the ones that you submitted, right? Yeah. So we want to display in this table only the invoice request submitted by this specific user. So how do I do it? If I don't apply any filter criteria, all the invoices would be filtered and displayed there. So whether it is an invoice created by me or Abhinav or Sachin or for anybody else, it would be displayed to everyone, which is not true, right? So we need to apply a filter criteria. So what's the filter criteria that we want to apply? I want to add a condition here and say, boss, don't show me all the invoices. Show me only the invoices which are created by. Show me only the invoices which are created by equal to, you have these many operators here. So I want to display only the invoices which are created by. And if you go into application system, you would be able to see our user details in here. Okay. So I'm going to add this username here. So what I'm saying is, don't get all the invoices, get only the invoices which are created by that specific user, by the user who has signed in. So if I put mouse in here, so you see there are few fields showing up here. Unfortunately, this username field will not be showing up in the drop-down here. So to get the binding of this, what I can do is I can just map it to any of the field. Just get this binding. You go back into filter criteria and you can add that binding there. And you said done. So what is it that we are doing now? So we're saying get all the invoices. But on top of this, we are applying a filter. And what's the filter that we are applying? Get only the invoices which are created by the user who has signed in. So whatever user has signed in, get me only the invoices created by that specific user. Now let me click on finish. And we see that there are no records getting displayed here. But in the invoice business object, do we have 2 rows in here, guys? We have 2 rows, right? But when I go ahead and run this, when I go ahead and launch the application, we're not seeing any rows in here. What's the problem, guys? Now, the reason is it could be because of that filter, right? So these 2 invoices might not have been created by UGOIC.user1 because I'm checking for the invoices. I'm checking if those 2 invoices are created by that user or not. So let's go ahead and see which user created the invoice, guys. If you go into a data tab and if you edit it, you see the columns here, guys. You would not be able to see from the VBCS front end, you will not be able to see the who columns. You will not be able to see the who columns, guys. Okay, you will not be able to see the who columns here. So yes, but what I can do, I can go to the database and query it to see. Now, what's the schema created for this VBCS samples? If you go into settings, business objects, you should be able to see the schema here. So I need to query this schema. So I have to say schema name dot invoice. So if you see here, if you query this table, you see that there are two invoices here. But what's the created by for these two invoices, guys? It is OIC user 19, right? But what is the user with which we have logged in to OIC? It is OIC.user1. Since these two invoices are not created by me, so these two invoice requests are not showing up in the dropdown here. They are not showing up in the dropdown. So what I can do to easily fix this, I can update the invoice. I can update the created by as UGOIC.user1 here for these two invoices. Now, if you go ahead and launch it, you go ahead and refresh the application, we should be able to see those two invoices now. Okay, because these two invoices are now created by UGOIC user1. And we can also go ahead and fine tune the application, guys. Can close it. Go ahead and fine tune the application as well. So invoice reference billed to customer number. So you're seeing the two invoice requests here. Now, how did we add these invoice requests, guys? So to help us with a user interface build, we added these two requests from a backend, right? So when we created a data model in the invoice business object, I added these two rows manually from the backend. But how is user going to create these two invoices, guys? How is user going to create them? So we have to give them a functionality here. So we need to give user an option to create an invoice here, update and delete an invoice. So how do we add that CRUD functionality? So we go ahead and select the table. Otherwise, let's stop here, guys. I think we reached a logical stage. We'll stop here for today. And in Monday's session, we'll see how to add the CRUD functionality to the application. Okay, because this would take at least 15-20 minutes to explain. Any questions, guys? From anyone? Thank you, guys. See you on